welcome to our first Resilient Georgia Lunch and Learn of the year. Feel free to keep your cameras off, especially if you're eating. And then at the end, we'll have some time for a casual conversation and some questions. So today, I am happy to introduce Jesse Kohler from the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice. He is the executive director there, and he is going to share an overview of the practical resources and strategies to support development of trauma-informed workplaces across different sectors. And so he is the executive director at CTIPP, and he is on loan from the Change Campaign. In this role, Jesse manages organizational operations and programming and leads administrative efforts as a board member. His career began with grassroots work in Philadelphia for nonprofit organizations, and he transitioned to full-time work on systems transformation at the start of the pandemic. He holds a master's in educational leadership from Arcadia University and a trauma competent professional certification from Lakeside Global Institute. He's currently pursuing his executive master's in public administration at the University of Pennsylvania, from which he is expected to graduate in May 2026. So we are so excited to have Jesse here, and I will go ahead and turn it to him.
Appreciate it, Nikki. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's really nice to be with all of you. I'm going to go ahead and share some slides that I'll be running through. So I'm going to try to keep this, for anybody who knows me, I can get pretty wordy pretty quick. And so I've got some notes to try and keep this to about 20 minutes to allow for as much conversation as possible. There's also a link to the full toolkit that's available for free. So know that what I'm sharing here today, there's a resource guide. There are other webinars that go deeper than I'll go today. But as Nikki said, I'm here to discuss the contents of CTIPP's Trauma-Informed Workplace Toolkit. And this toolkit, just so you know, was really designed to support advocates in taking steps to help any organization and the individuals who make it up to understand the importance of the paradigm shift of becoming trauma informed and changing our ways of thinking, being, doing, knowing, and relating within our work and workplaces. It was not designed to be a full implementation guide, though there are helpful considerations and examples throughout it. It's just a place to really get the work started and deepen our understandings. And we know that this work requires an ongoing commitment to learning and growth. Foundationally, in a world where most people have been exposed to trauma in some way, shape, or form, trauma-informed environments must become the norm. I know that I'm preaching to the choir when I say that. At this point, we know what helps, how to promote vicarious post-traumatic growth, compassion, satisfaction, moral resiliency, and moral courage, as well as what hurts, how burnout, compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress, vicarious trauma, etc. are perpetuated. And that is what you will find in this toolkit at an individual and a systems level. We really work to take a both and approach to what our organizations can and should do to promote well-being in and beyond the workplace, as well as recognizing what individuals can do to promote well-being and trauma-informed workplaces themselves. A trauma-informed workplace, though, cannot rely on just one person or some people doing this work, though we recognize that different folks and departments across an organization may have different roles. While individuals can advocate for trauma-informed workplaces, truly trauma-informed workplaces, which I hold a very high bar for what I mean when I say truly trauma-informed, relies on more than just an individual or small group of people to achieve it, relies on buy-in from everyone, though again, different individuals and groups can of course have different roles and responsibilities. Recognizing that workplaces evolve and are living, experience their own traumas, and that healing takes place over time is critical as this work emerges and sustains cultural shifts within organizations. We need a paradigm shift to understand that promoting well-being of workers is the priority, and evidence suggests that when this becomes the priority, bottom line figures and productivities increase and improve. But that doesn't mean that then all of a sudden when we get there, productivity and financial performance again become the priority. Of course, this is critical for business, but our people must always come first. As individuals, we are more than just our work product. We need sleep and play, and we need to address the lapses as we create a stronger economy and workforce at a very macro level, right? As well as meso and down to the micro levels. We cannot put the onus of well-being on individuals alone. Our systems and workplaces must take ownership of the ways in which they perpetuate harm and the impacts that that then has across the social ecological framework. Our work environments play a crucial role in shaping our well being, which makes sense as most adults spend substantial time in the workplace. What happens in work impacts other domains of our lives and vice versa, which is why we think about solutions as best we can in holistic and systematic ways. Particularly since the COVID pandemic, according to many reports, there has been a substantial increase in the number of US workers who report that their mental health impacts their ability to do their jobs. And the report names in the LIRA State of Work report very specifically trauma responses as creating cascading challenges that impact the workplace. More and more workers are looking for workplaces that promote well-being and will look after them. And workplaces that offer such benefits also show increased satisfaction and connection within the workplace. The time to create trauma-informed workplaces has been present for a very long time, probably forever. Yet the continued and in many cases growing needs to address the traumas that we have experienced and continue to experience as a society creates ripe opportunities for the continued push for more trauma-informed workplaces today. Beyond just needing to support individuals in the workplace, these supports help the workplace and our economy at large as well. I wish that we lived in a society where we made decisions because it was just what was best for people. And I maintain hope that we will continue to create that society. However, in our capitalist systems, the economic arguments can often be necessary to support this change at a macro level. And economic data and current trends also support the need for this work. We are talking about lost productivity and additional costs in the trillions of dollars every single year as a result of unmet needs around chronic stress and overwhelming adversity. So, building buffers and supports through trauma informed approaches will help people and will also help businesses and our economy at large. So, as we look toward trauma informed workplaces, we want to work to understand how trauma shows up so that we recognize trauma, realize its impacts, respond effectively, and resist traumatization and re traumatization. Trauma is not just an event or series of events, but the interpretation of that event or those events, which is up to various individual and environmental factors. While some events are widely traumatic, the perception of how an event impacts different people differently makes the concept of trauma complex. We cannot know every trauma that someone has experienced or the ways in which they interpret their environments around them, which is why creating universal precautions and conditions of safety and empowerment is so important. Trauma can cause some people to become hypervigilant, while others may become dissociative, while others may move between these two responses. Some folks may not even be aware that these changes are taking place at the time that they are. So, regardless of individual adaptation, without support to promote healing, trauma can have lifelong impacts to the body, mind, personality, and our relationships. We know that with support and time, post traumatic growth and post traumatic wisdom provide immense hope for the future despite the challenges that we face throughout our lives. We must also recognize that without these supports, compounding losses and tragedies can reduce our capacities to cope, which is why prevention and building structures that promote connection are incredibly important in this work. Audrey, Nikki, anybody else? I don't have the chat pulled up, so if there's something to respond to immediately, please feel free to cut me off.
Okay.
And
I guess the question was just if we could share slides after the presentation.
oh, of course, yes,
Okay, wonderful. Thank
gladly.
you. Thank you.
And yeah, please continue to let questions come in because again, uh, we'll get into a longer Q&A discussion to dive deeper. Um, so these factors that you see on the screen can manifest across the workspace in a variety of ways that are harmful to workplace cultures. We know that these are just some of the ways that trauma presents itself in the workplace. And beyond just awareness, being trauma informed incorporates meaningful integration into changing traditional paradigms and our ways of operating. Let's take a look at how we can examine and consider ways that policies and practices can support trauma-informed workplaces, which is a critical part of this discussion as policies and practices have the power to institutionalize trauma-informed principles throughout a system. Please know that while we will stay relatively high level within this presentation, again, there is a lot more to explore within the toolkit itself for those who are interested. Being trauma informed is not and cannot just be a checkbox item or achievable within a single training. As I said earlier, it's about committing to an ongoing process of learning and growth. There are many ways, such as systematized evaluation and reflection of employees and programs, that a commitment to this ongoing process can be integrated within our work processes. Garnering and increasing buy-in from everyone throughout an organization is important. And when leadership gets invested, especially when that leadership trusts others instead of just doing a top-down approach, change can sometimes become accelerated. The returns on this work take time, so we must remain patient and diligent in this work as we turn the tide within workplace cultures toward well-being. And a great way to do this can be to celebrate and build upon all wins along the way, big wins and small wins for individual employees, our customers or constituents, as well as for the workplace and organization as a whole. Just as a heads up, this is going to be the longest slide that I spend time on. And there are many examples of strategies that can work to promote trauma-informed workplaces. There are links and examples of these programs or practices again throughout the toolkit, which you can read that venture deeper and further. But I want to use our work at CTIPP as an example to bring to life a lot of what you might see on the slide of how we have worked to create these conditions so that people can feel proud of their work and allow us individually and collectively to thrive. These strategies help us secure trauma-informed principles into the policies that govern the workplace, as well as support us in showing up in the dailiness of our work and interactions within our workplace. This big change takes time, and all of these cannot and will not happen overnight. We know that as the process sustains and scales for longer periods of time, continuing the effort to do so can become more exciting as we see the changes benefit the work product and culture, which makes it easier to continue the commitment. We know that businesses benefit through both a people-oriented lens as well as a financial-oriented lens when trauma-informed transformation takes hold in the workplace and compounds over the long haul. So, like I said, at CTIP, we work really hard to model the model in our own work. We're not perfect, and there is a lot of room for us to grow, but this has been something that we've been committed to from the very beginning, especially now as I am preparing to transition from my role as executive director on loan to CTIP to support my successor, Jeremy, to be able to lead the organization in a full-time capacity further than I've been able to do over the last 5 years. I think about the lessons that I've learned while at CTIP. Understanding our own organization's trauma, a part of which is that we were unfunded for the first more than 5 years of our history. So while there was never a doubt about the direction and importance of our mission, the way that we were organized was primarily through a volunteer board, which led to a lack of coordination as people did their best that they could on discrete tasks, but we didn't have the full capacity to coordinate across all of those, what we called orchestras at the time. And then when we started to get funding and staff after the onset of COVID, this led to new opportunities, but also led to new obstacles, which we have continued to work through. And I am proud of the progress that we have made, but just want to emphasize again how this work takes time. Thinking about the point on the last slide about being patient and intentional. Work is being done at multiple levels to ensure that we are continuously working toward becoming more trauma informed and documenting our journey to try and support others from what we learn works and what hasn't worked for us. As a board, we have dealt with obvious and yet still very difficult to answer questions, like what does a trauma informed organization and board look like? Structurally, the authority that's held in the hands of those not doing the work every day is inherently problematic. This has been particularly difficult as board roles have changed as the organization has grown, going from needing to focus on creating white papers as a volunteer organization to needing to focus on the fiduciary duties that a governing board, rather than just a volunteer board, must manage. There is still a long way to go in this process. We have tried to model transparency and choice by communicating that these changes are taking place very explicitly and supporting our board members who have not wanted to continue as the positions have evolved over time. We continue to work on this and have good goals set for the year ahead. As a staff, we have worked hard to incorporate practices that allow us to navigate the stresses of being in this work every day. When our team was larger before we began the process of preparing for the transition, in addition to one-on-ones and team calls to discuss work, we would have regularly scheduled process calls, which were generally about every other week, where we just had time to talk about how we were doing personally and professionally and support each other on a human level without any need to be discussing work like our normal team calls would usually come back to. We invested resources, the most valuable of which was our time, on training and coaching that have helped us toward better conflict resolution skills and creating healthy team processes to leverage the potential that comes up in conflict, to navigate and learn together, though we also know that conflict can become destructive if it isn't managed well. We do our best not to set arbitrary deadlines while remaining reliable for our network. Obviously, there are times that deadlines are real, and then there are other times that we set self imposed deadlines that can lead to increased stress, right? We try to balance that stress with accountability. As an underfunded organization where most of our team, including myself, has been part time, we work to establish a culture where we trust that each other is working as hard as possible to get our work done. There have been some hard conversations when we felt that people were not pulling their weight, but we found that building this trust was critical. I can honestly say that doing so did not see a slowdown in work product, but reduced unnecessary and unproductive stress that allowed for our work to be done better and more quickly than likely otherwise would could have happened. Obviously, I don't know the counterfactual, but I think it was better. As a leader myself, I have worked on what decentralized leadership looks like and worked to establish democratic processes for staff to generate work that they see as necessary from their perspectives, while balancing that with competing demands around fundraising, ensuring follow through on our work that has already been started, and more. It is difficult to balance the business needs and the people needs, or I should say the financial needs and the people needs, but that's the responsibility of being an organizational leader. Whether meeting with a board member, an employee, a volunteer, a funder, someone on one of our calls, or anyone else, I've worked hard to show up as fully as possible to support them while maintaining the barriers that I must for my organization and team. I have found, as we will highlight on the next slide, that this means that I must take care of myself so I can be there for others. This is not because of my title, as I believe that leadership can exist anywhere within an organization. And when I was an intern and a board member for CTIPP before we ever got funded, I tried to do this as well. It requires work and diligence to be able to show up in empathic ways that hold healthy boundaries. I have continuously learned from what is and is not working to inform the strategic vision for our work, and do my best to leave my ego aside and put the mission we are working toward and my team's well-being as paramount focus in the work. As an organization, we have grappled with how to build and lead the movement in trauma-informed ways. As a primary advocacy organization promoting trauma-informed policies and practices widely in Congress, it has been a journey navigating how we ensure that we are not just authoritatively telling people what must be important to them or how they should do their work. As I have said, this work takes place or looks different in different contexts, though we must also protect against trauma-informed just becoming a buzzword, right? This is why we have kept all of our resources free of charge, as we have felt this is in line with our model. We have partnered with coalitions that lead on particular policies with more capacity than we have alone as an organization. We have worked to build capacity into the organization beyond any one leader, which is why the organization was able to manage the death of our founder and my mentor, Dan Press, in 2022, as I was able to, in my 20s, continue the work in this role over the past 5 years. We have worked to be even more intentional through this transition, where the board and I have worked closely over the last 18 months to build processes and reserves that give the organization the best possible chance at continued success through the current transition and beyond. This has been hard for me and others, but as we execute the strategies that we put in place, I remain incredibly hopeful about CTIPP, its mission, and most importantly, our network and the broader movement that we are here to support. This work is hard, and the starting point for different organizations will be different, but we engage in similar processes no matter where we start when we really commit to this work. Asking hard questions and being open to critical feedback is necessary as we grow. Developing a shared language and discussing shared values early and often helps to reduce how our own experiences of trauma can come up throughout the process of our work. Updating as new team members join and the organization evolves is necessary to sustain these initiatives over time. And leadership giving up some power and the team as a whole increasing accountability can be hard, but in my own experiences and what we've seen from others, it is very much so worth it. While we have been discussing trauma and trauma-informed approaches at more of a systems level, and again, the onus cannot be only on individuals, we do recognize again that there are individual strategies that we can take to be more trauma-informed. And this slide shows just some of those strategies which can work to make a difference and progress toward creating trauma-informed workplaces. Being advocates ourselves for trauma-informed policies and practices and modeling the model is very important, as are opportunities to create space for community building, setting healthy boundaries for ourselves, like I said on the last slide, and analyzing our organizational policies and practices can be important steps that we as individuals can take as agents of change within our own organizations. I won't go into as much detail as I did, at least not while sharing slides, for time's sake, but we'll just quickly share that the areas of growth in this realm that I have reflected on and built upon include taking care of myself to ensure that I can work to show up more fully for others in the organization, which has looked like very specifically a morning routine that I do before I sit down at my desk to start the workday, which has been important because in work that is fundamentally about promoting well-being, we must ensure that we are working toward wellness ourselves, right? We deserve the same well-being that we work to promote for others. Working to recognize the way that I show up in places that I am in, while also balancing that with my full authentic self has been a wonderful thing to navigate, and working to hold boundaries for myself and the organization so that we are doing what we can to support others while also trying to ensure that we are not so overstretched that we are unable to thrive, which in the current state of our world over the last 5 years has been very difficult. These are high level, and there are many more examples, which again, you can find examples and strategies of in the toolkit itself. So again, I know that that was high level, but I thank you so much for letting me be with you again. I think that the resource was shared in the chat. There's a lot more on the website, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so, so much, Jesse. Such an important topic. Um, and we at Resilient Georgia, we know that, we've heard from folks that you're advocating for this work in different sectors and in your communities, and that includes your own workplace as well. And so that's why we wanted to bring Jesse here to talk about this and share about the Trauma Informed Toolkit. I put the link as well as the PDF in the chat. And so now we can kind of just open up a discussion. Any questions that you have for Jesse on this topic? Anything that came up? There is one question in the chat from Kamisha. She said, where do you see organizations struggle most in implementation?
It's a good question, Kamisha, and definitely not a one size fits all. And I'd be curious to know what others see as, the biggest kind of where organizations struggle the most. The two that come to mind initially, one is when there's a leader, like leadership challenges, right? That either don't buy in and there's a small group of folks who are not provided with the resources, again, whether that be financially or time wise, to really integrate this across an organization, or a leader that becomes overly authoritative, which is inherently not trauma informed, and which can then get in the way of thwarting efforts, right? Just in terms of kind of like the long haul of this work. And then one of the other common struggles and frustrations, if you couldn't tell by throughout my presentation, is when organizations treat it as a checkbox, right? We did a training, so therefore we are trauma informed, and that is not what it means to be trauma informed. Again, if you look at the Missouri model, we can celebrate trauma awareness. I am all about celebrating the journey. But when, an organization says, we did a training, we are trauma informed, or when a state says this, or a lot of times that's when we see the work actually stop, right? And we know that it's about a process and that things evolve and change over time. And so that mentality, that like mental model that we did a training, therefore we are, is definitely a major challenge that we see come up time and time again.
Thank you. Yes, we see that as well. And we've heard that from our partners too, that, oh, we did this training, we're trauma informed, but it is not a destination, it's a constant journey. So thank you for pointing that out. We have a couple more questions in the chat. Andrea asked, why is it that organizations who are helping with others' well-being often struggle to focus inward on their own processes and the well-being of their own employees? I see this with mental health providers who report not having sufficient mental health services provided by their own insurance and workplace. It's a big question.
That's a great question, Andrew. I think one of the initial thoughts that comes to my mind, and I'm sure that there's a million answers to that sort of like wicked problem that exists. But I remember when I was working at the community center that I worked at, right? There was such stress um, on in terms of trying to meet all of the unmet needs that existed within the communities that we served, that uh, we oftentimes lost ourselves and had huge retention and turnover issues, which again kind of created its own organizational trauma, right? And I think that uh, we had this might be like a little heady, so I hope it makes sense. But one of the hallmarks of trauma is fragmentation, right? At an individual level, we can become fragmented with our narratives. We can feel as though parts of ourselves are sort of broken off. And the healing process is about integration. For anybody who does mental health counseling or therapy, please forgive me for way oversimplifying a very complex process. But that integration is really, really critical. At an organizational level, we see trauma create fragmentation again with siloing different services or different departments from one another. And a lot of times it leads to very confusing sort of outcomes. And I think that that then perpetuates stress and adversity that creates the predictable outcomes that we see at an individual level. And so, a lot of times when we see the executive level be detached from the actual implementation of work, we see things that might be misaligned in terms of vision and values, which is where we are trying to promote well-being for others, but our workplace literally does not provide the infrastructure for us to promote our own well-being when hard things come up. In the case of, insurance, there are some real structural uh, issues and inequities that definitely exist that make that challenging for workplaces to navigate. But I think that, again, like I said with CTIP, and at this point I recognize I'm just rambling. And again, there's like a ton of different potential answers to your question. But we really had to work to learn how to navigate conflict and conflict and conversations, so that way we could come toward productive outcomes and work together through kind of conflicts that were emerging as learning opportunities. And I think it can be challenging to raise concerns to executive level in a way that they hear and integrate meaningful changes that then support and promote well-being for staff over time, right? We've seen organizations that have huge budgets for um, hiring processes and recruitment processes because they just have such a high churn rate. And we try to advocate to them and say, well, if you take some of that and invest that in promoting well-being, you will have less churn and you will actually save money over time through the hard costs of those recruitment practices, as well as the soft costs of not losing like historical knowledge and that intellect that exists within organizations. But I mean, that is $1 million question plus that you asked, and I hope that there was something in the rambles that sent me down.
Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, we have some really great questions in the chat coming in. So, Bridget said, as someone who works to prepare future professionals for careers, so young people, college students, what would your advice be to how we can better prepare these young leaders to implement from the beginning of their careers?
So I got into this work when I was 23. I was very, very lucky to have an internship that I worked on that introduced me to some really, really wonderful people. And I think one of the biggest initial barriers when I was coming out of college, um, you know, as with many college students, I picked up some unhealthy habits, I'll call it, and coping mechanisms. Um, and in navigating trauma informed, in trying to promote trauma informed care, um, I had to navigate, my own lived experiences, so that way it didn't come up as much uh, in the work that I was doing with others, right? And that's an imperfect science, and again, that doesn't mean that you have to provide counseling or therapy to them necessarily, but supporting people in finding their why at a young age, and then becoming advocates or practitioners that are connected to um, you know, their own lived experiences and expertise at a young age that create self-efficacy, that start to build that process early on is really important. It's challenging for young people right now with the current job market, and just want to recognize that as well. And there's probably a lot of stress that you're navigating. But I think I was very fortunate to have some mentors and leaders that really helped me understand, again, how I showed up and the strengths of being able to use my own lived experience as a coach, as a director of development, as someone that worked in a school, um, and then how that created very passionate advocacy and harder work as my career has matured over the last 10 or so years.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think just having those positive leadership models, role models, and examples in our lives can really help us become more trauma informed and just better leaders in general. Um, Kamisha asked, have you seen this toolkit adapted successfully for smaller organizations with limited capacity?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kamisha. So, CTIP's operating budget is $300,000. So I don't know, we can define small organization in different ways because $300,000 is infinitely more than when we were an all volunteer organization with $0. But we have adapted bits and pieces, right, within our workplaces. We don't have some of the same structural challenges in a small organization as others do, but still working to create conditions of safety and empowerment and working to promote trust and transparency. That is challenging in a small organization as well as a larger organization, and supporting individuals in being able to promote their own well-being and implement strategies. There are in some ways different opportunities for small organizations to be able to create that sort of close relational feel. And so again, I recognize that the entire toolkit may not be uh, relevant for a smaller organization, but I think that a lot of it would, and we've seen that as we have modeled, our work on a lot of what's in the workplace as well.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. Oh, go ahead, Kamisha.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say thank you, Jesse, for answering that question, only because with where we are in Gwinnett, we're running into a lot of like maybe departments in organizations who want to be trauma informed. So not necessarily the whole shebang, but one small part. So just wanting to see if because of that, would that change the fidelity of the toolkit? But sounds like you can adapt it to make it fit for whatever the capacity is for that department, that small org, what have you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Kamisha. And I'll just say, like, I think that there's, from an advocacy perspective, like a wonderful opportunity that if as that department implements and you see improvements over time, then that can spread to the organization as a whole, right?
Yeah,
That can be a wonderful place to kind of get in. But appreciate the question and the work you're
thank you.
doing.
Yeah, and just to add, I'm just scrolling through the PDF, and on page 13, it talks about organizational strategies, and a lot of these are just shifting the way that we interact with each other, interact with our colleagues. The first strategy is leading with empathy, right? You can do that anywhere as an individual. It starts from within, just supporting mental health, anchoring a culture and shared values, um, consider dedicated support, create connection points. Like these are things organizations, big or small, can prioritize, right? So just kind of wanted to point out, like these are not like life altering strategies that you have to implement. Like they can start small and they can start with just how we
Mhm.
communicate better with each other. Yeah.
Exactly. Nikki,
Um, mhm,
before you ask the next question, because I know
mhm,
that it was asked for earlier,
mhm.
I put just the slides in the chat so that folks can have those. And if something I said stuck with you, then you have almost the verbatim speaker notes in there. So all of that is available in the chat. But go ahead, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, thank you for sharing that. We have a couple more questions. So, as organizations face transitions, like leadership changes, how can this ensure that the work continues in this
Yeah,
space?
that is where values and mission alignment from like the onset across the entire team to me is incredibly critical, right? So when Dan and I were doing this work, and for those of you who haven't heard of Dan Press or had the pleasure of meeting him, he was just an unbelievable guy, right? Who, when I was 24, he was just like, I'm going to start giving this kid some projects and work, and we developed a relationship over time. Is kind of what happened. Actually, the quick story, and I know that we're like running short on time, but like he was like 75. He didn't know how to open a Zoom call back in like 2018, and that was actually my in to help with CTIP, is that I knew how to operate Zoom. So that was kind of how I got my start with Dan. But we talked about the values that we ran on, right? And I don't have the 50 years of congressional experience that he had, but the values alignment of doing work at the best way that we can, recognizing that it is about embedding tighter community fabric so that fewer people fall through the cracks. This was how we understood it. So that way everybody had the opportunities to thrive, right? And really try to build that into individuals, families, and communities helped us navigate through his loss. He got sick, and there was a very traumatic and sad process over the course of about a year that we lost Dan and sort of worked this transition through. And then in our work, obviously, there's a lot of structural pieces that are in place that we've tried to be really intentional about that are challenging, right? I'm 32. I don't like to think about, you know, anybody like I still have my whole career ahead of me for the most part. And so it's been challenging to put in place the leadership transition there, but to think at an organizational level, what are the pieces that are necessary to ensure that we have what we need to be able to move forward? And then, support conversation and relationship building where we've got a month and a half. Again, we've been developing this plan for about 18 months, and then we have a month and a half um, overlap period, so that way it's not rushed. And then one of the things that I'm doing is, in case there was something that I missed, like I am providing access to my email, my Google Drive after I leave, so that way if there's someone whose name comes up, the new ED can search through my email. If there's some document that I didn't file away right, there's, that kind of historical knowledge, right? That transparency side of things are, as a small organization that didn't have structures or processes put in place, how we have tried to navigate that both, the first time that what Dan did right of putting me in a position that I could succeed. And then what we're trying to do this time, so that way Jeremy can succeed and the organization continues to not just be well, but hopefully grow and thrive. Right.
And we have one more question. I think we have time for one more. So Emily Ann said, how does CTIP navigate the stress of trying to rationalize and think strategically with irrational systems and policies? She says, I'm struggling on days when I have more policy related work and would love to hear if your team has implemented anything to decompress. So basically, when you're running into these issues against these systems, what would you suggest? What do you do in those situations?
So I'm reading this potentially two ways. So before I go into another just rabbit hole in my own mind and externally process, because it's a really important question, I will say that we all fall all the time into just policy rabbit holes. Right. And I think that the process calls that we implemented and having a place on the calendar that we talked about kind of like, what is going on with our team was a really important calendar hold that allowed for us to always have at least some time for just being there at a relational level, right? Where we fall into those process we just fall into policy rabbit holes, and especially as a small team that works remotely, it can be really really easy to become really really isolated really quickly. And so that was an important like structural piece that we implemented. um, and then I think like, again, to me, to the stresses of what you're navigating, Emily Ann, and so many of you on the call, having a trauma lens through which I see systems and Congress as an incredibly traumatized body, and the policies that they either do or do not promote as, kind of having being part of its own greater trauma response, has helped me to internalize less of the frustrations that I still internalize a lot, but certainly in healthier ways because of just the craziness of trying to do this work right now. Right. And in hopefully being able to model a trauma informed approach as we promote trauma informed approaches like, policies and practices. I think that it's trauma-informed care is not a silver bullet or, healing centered. I've been using the word trauma-informed, but obviously different people use different language routinely for, I think, what are very similar principles at the end of the day. Um, but like understanding how trauma impacts individuals and systems has been somewhat of like a Rosetta Stone for me to be able to understand just what is happening, right? The original question that Sandy Bloom asked in the sanctuary model, like instead of asking what's wrong, like what has happened, which has led
Mhm.
toward its very own sort of responses. But in addition to the process calls that have given the space to connect on just a human level and make sure that that's there, um, as we do policy deep dives into like what is happening right now, having that trauma lens
Mhm.
inform how we read and interact with that, I think has been a helpful individual process as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Jesse, for your insight and experience in this space. I know this was such a valuable conversation for so many of us. I know we are at time. I just dropped in another resource. Jesse mentioned earlier that this idea of being trauma informed, there is a tendency for these things to become buzzwords, or people might tune out when they hear these things so much. So if you need to go a different angle with your organization or leadership in talking about these same ideas, in a way that people might respond to them better. Like if you are running, your head against a wall with these conversations and creating these healthier workspaces, um, everything that was talked about in this toolkit aligns with just good leadership strategies that have been talked about for years and years and years. And so I recently just read this book, The Leadership Challenge, How to Make Extraordinary Things Happen in Organizations. It's a wonderful book. It's when I was reading it, I was like, this is a trauma-informed workplace. Like this is a model for trauma-informed leadership. They're just not calling it that. So just another resource to share, like know your audience and know who is going to be receptive to how you start this conversation in different ways. So just wanted to share that. I also put in the chat our survey, link to our Survey Monkey. So please review, feel free to submit that. It just takes a couple minutes, 5 questions on your thoughts on this session. But we are so, so grateful for you, Jesse, for being with us today. And yeah, we hope everybody has a great rest of their Thursday. We'll make sure that this recording is up on our website soon. We'll share all of the resources that Jesse shared via email, including the recording. And so please share this far and wide so folks can have access to this information. Thank you all.
Grateful
Have
for
a,
you all. Thank you.
thank you, Jesse.